There's a specific moment in a senior leader's career. Most people who have been through it can describe it exactly, even if they have never found the right words for it. You are working harder than you ever have. The strategy for the business is probably pretty sound. The decisions that you are making are not obviously wrong, and your team's capable. Probably also the market conditions, while not perfect, are not extraordinary either. And yet, something is not translating. Your results are not matching what you are putting in. The effort is there, the capability is there, but the output is not what it should be. The response of almost every leader at this point is the same. You increase the output, more hours, more involvement, closer attention to the details, and probably also more hands-on in the decisions. You're probably also more present in the rooms where things are not moving as they should be. And still, it does not work. In this video, I'm going to explain exactly why. There are 3 specific reasons that this happens, and the third one is not where most people think to look. Because this is not a motivation problem, and it's not in most cases a strategy problem, and it's almost certainly not a team problem, even though it often gets diagnosed as one. What has changed is something in how you are operating, a pattern. And the specific nature of that pattern is what makes it so difficult to see. Because the pattern that is now creating the friction you're experiencing is the same one that made you successful in the first place. A brief word on who I am before we go further. I run a diagnostic practice for decision makers focusing on leadership risk in times of pressure. I've navigated through that pressure myself as someone who used to be on the leadership team of a global stock-listed financial group. Every leader builds an operating pattern in conditions that reward it. Early in a career, certain behaviors produce results. You move quickly and you make decisions that others hesitate on. Or you might be rigorous and risk-aware, and that rigor catches things that other people miss. Or you might build strong relationships and operate through trust and influence. Or maybe you challenge the room, drive for precision, and hold a higher standard than the people around you. These behaviors get rewarded. They produce results, and they become reliable. And over time, they become habitual. Actually, more than habitual. They become part of how you think about yourself as a leader. So when someone asks you how you approach a problem, you describe this pattern. When you reflect on what has made you effective, you point to this pattern. It's not just a behavior. It has become part of your professional identity. Now, here's where the shift begins to happen. As seniority increases, the context changes. The stakeholder environment becomes more complex, and the decisions carry more consequences and more ambiguity. The team requires a different kind of leadership than it did at earlier stages. The things that the role actually requires begin to shift, but the pattern does not shift with them. It continues running, not because you're unaware or unwilling to adapt, but because the pattern operates largely below the level of conscious decision, and because it has been rewarded in the past, and because it feels from the inside like competence. This is the core mechanism. It is not that you are doing the wrong things, it is that you are doing the right things from an earlier version of a role, in conditions that no longer match. And the capabilities that carried you here are still very much present, but the pattern around them is creating friction that did not exist before. And that friction is where the mismatch between effort and result is. Here's where this becomes genuinely difficult. A pattern that is creating friction for you right now is also most likely the thing that you feel most confident in. That is not a paradox. It's the direct consequence of how the pattern is formed. There are 3 reasons this is almost impossible to see from the inside, and I want to name them precisely because understanding them is what makes the difference between working harder at the wrong problem and actually addressing the right one. The first is what I call the identity lock. At a certain point in a leadership career, the operating pattern stops being something you do and starts being something you are. Think about how you typically describe yourself as a leader. You describe your strengths, your approach, or how you navigate uncertainty, or how you hold a team, and how you make decisions. That self-description is built from the operating pattern. It is not a separate account of behavior. It's an account of identity. And when the pattern is running in conditions it is no longer suited for, you do not experience it as a problem. You experience pressure. And under pressure, the identity tends to consolidate rather than open up. Now, the pattern does not get questioned, it gets doubled down on. And this is not a weakness, it's a very normal psychological response. But it means that the thing most in need for examination is the thing that is most protected from it. The second is the evidence trap. You have years of proof that this pattern works. You have direct, personal, verifiable evidence. The career that it has built you, the decisions that landed and the teams that followed you. The results that were produced are further evidence, as is the history that doesn't disappear when the pattern stops working in a new context. It continues to argue against treating the pattern as the problem. So when something is not producing the results that it should, the natural reading, the rational reading, given your evidence, is that the problem lies elsewhere. External conditions, the team, the strategy, or the environment are typical explanations. All of these feel like more credible hypotheses than that something in how you operate and something with a long and successful track record has become the friction. This is not denial, it's a reasonable inference from available data. The problem is that the data is incomplete. The pattern's cost in the current context is not legible in the same way its historical value is. The third is the feedback gradient, the people closest to how you operate. The ones with the most accurate read of what is actually happening are not giving you their unfiltered observations, not because they're withholding, because the authority structure changes what is safe to say. And people calibrate to power. They always have, always will. What is safe to show and what is better managed around what will be welcome and what will create friction. And these calculations happen at every level around you, including with people who report to you and work alongside you. The result is that the signal you receive about your own impact has already been shaped by your own presence before it reaches you. Not dramatically, not dishonestly, but consistently. And the signal that would be most valuable to you, the clear, direct observation that something in your operating pattern is creating a specific problem, is exactly the signal that travels least reliably upwards through a structure where you sit at the top. What these 3 mechanisms have in common is this. They do not announce themselves. They do not feel like blind spots. They feel like normal functioning. The identity feels like confidence and the evidence feels like experience. The feedback gradient feels like ordinary organizational life. And that is precisely why the mismatch between effort and results can persist for so long before anyone, including you, identifies where it is actually coming from. And by the way, if you're finding this useful, subscribe to the channel. I publish regularly on this territory. There's a dimension to this that goes beyond individual psychology. There's a study I return regularly on this. looking at what happened at Nokia as the smartphone era arrived. Senior leaders were making critical strategic decisions based on information that had been systematically filtered before it reached them. People in the organization knew things that were not being brought to the leadership level because the authority dynamics made it unsafe to do so. Now, the executives thought that they had an accurate picture. They did not. This is not an exceptional situation, it's how authority structures simply work. The three mechanisms I described, the identity lock, the evidence trap, the feedback gradient, they are not individual failures. They are structural features of operating at a level where your position changes what people around you are willing to tell you. What happened at Nokia was not a failure of candor or culture. It was the predictable consequence of an authority structure operating normally. And this is the part that makes this genuinely different from most other leadership challenges. Most difficulties a senior leader faces can be addressed by working on them directly. You can gather better information, you can change the team, or you can revise the strategy. The mechanism itself is accessible, but this one is not. Because the instrument you would use to assess the problem, your own observation and judgment, is exactly the instrument that has been compromised. Not dramatically and not totally, but enough that it cannot produce the accurate read you need. And this is why the mismatch between effort and result is so persistent. It cannot be resolved by working harder, and it cannot be resolved by improving the strategy. It requires a different kind of input, an accurate read from outside the system. I want to be precise about this because there is a version of this kind of work that I want to be clear is not what I'm describing. This is not about transformation. It's also not about becoming a different kind of leader. It is not about a program or a journey or a set of skills to develop. It is about strategy, a precise personal strategy for operating effectively in the conditions that you are actually in, built on an accurate read of how you function, not on how you intend or believe you do. What changes when the pattern is visible is that you can make more precise adjustments and you can see specifically where the pattern is creating friction that does not need to exist and that does not serve you strategically. You can see what's being dialed up that is no longer serving the current context, and you can see what is being suppressed. The authority or the certainty or the strategic directness that would create more traction if it were present. That's what you get to see. So the work is very narrow. It's targeted at specific leverage points, not a general overhaul. And what also changes is something more practical, because the decisions, they become less effortful, not because the environment becomes easier, but because you are no longer working against your own operating pattern at the same time as navigating everything else. So the cognitive load that was invisible becomes visible, and once it is visible, it can be reduced. The results and effort question resolves when the friction in the pattern resolves, not before. And here's why this doesn't get resolved through the normal diagnostic infrastructure that surrounds senior leaders. Because most organizations, when they get to a certain size, they have processes designed to give feedback to leaders. There's performance reviews, there's 360 assessments, there's board evaluations, executive coaching, and all of that. And they are not useless, but they are not designed to read the kind of pattern that I have been describing. And here's why. Performance reviews measure outcomes. They tell you what the score is, and they do not tell you what it is that is producing it. They cannot tell you whether the friction in execution is coming from a market problem, a team problem, or a pattern in how you're operating. The output is the number, not the mechanism. 360 feedback is shaped by the same authority dynamics that suppress every other signal. People tell you what is safe to tell you, and the feedback is real in the sense that people do believe when they write it, they do believe it, but it's filtered through the relationship and the authority gradient. The result tends to confirm what was already assumed about you, with the rough edges softened. Executive coaching works on what you bring to the sessions, which is your interpretation of events. It's your account of what happened in the meeting. It's your reading of why the stakeholder is not moving. That account can be honest, and exploring it has value, but it's not an independent read of the pattern. It is a facilitated exploration of the leader's own narrative at one removed from what is actually operating. And assessment tools, when they are administered without skilled interpretation in context, and the context is what matters, they produce data without translation, a profile that tells you about risk factors and operating tendencies. It's a good starting point. What it means in the specific decision environment you are currently navigating against the specific stakeholders under the specific pressures, it's a different thing entirely. That translation requires both the diagnostic capability and the direct knowledge of the situation. So the standard diagnostic infrastructure around senior leaders is almost by design calibrated to give back to you a version of what you already believe about yourself. This is not an accident. It is what people at senior levels are comfortable receiving. And it is precisely why the pattern that is creating the friction stays invisible. Those who are able to get uncomfortable, they will be able to get to the root of it. And the work I do with leaders is exactly this point. It's a structured diagnostic. It's not coaching, and it's not an ongoing program. It's not a series of conversations where you figure things out gradually. It's a precise read of how you operate. What matters is what the pattern means in the specific situation that you are currently navigating with the specific stakeholders in, again, the specific pressures of where you are right now. If you are recognizing something in this video, then there's 3 places to go from here. The first is my newsletter. I write about these operating patterns every 2 weeks. The content is more specific, more operational, and closer to actual diagnostic thinking than anything I put out publicly. You can find the link in the description below. The second is a direct conversation. A short introduction call is complimentary. My contact details are also in the description. If what I have described today is relevant to where you are, that's the right place to start.